Welcome to Thread of Terror. We bring you the creepiest stories from Reddit. Dim the lights, grab a blanket, and hit subscribe so you never miss a scare. What is your Christmas horror story? Story 1. The Christmas Curse.
The wrought iron gates loomed before us, crowned with intricate patterns of ivy and roses. Beyond them, Willow Haven stretched out like a meticulously curated dream. Identical pastel houses lined the streets, each with flawless lawns and hedges trimmed to perfection. It was supposed to be a fresh start for me. At least that is what Mom and Dad kept saying. "Mike, this is what is best for you," Mom murmured, her voice trembling as she avoided my gaze. Dad, ever stern, added, "You need structure and discipline. This place will help us all." I did not argue. Months of therapy, school meetings, and hushed late-night debates had made it clear they saw me as the issue. So here we were, moving into Willow Haven, the place where troublemakers supposedly turned into angels. For weeks, everything was unsettlingly perfect. School was stricter, and the kids were disturbingly polite, always smiling, always obedient. The adults were the same, cheerful to the point of discomfort. The entire community felt staged, like some eerie dollhouse. Then Christmas arrived. The neighborhood transformed overnight. Houses were adorned with dazzling lights, and a giant tree stood in the park, its ornaments gleaming like tiny stars. Yet the festive cheer felt hollow, like a mask hiding something sinister. "Why are we not decorating?" I asked one evening. Mom flinched, her hand shaking as she arranged cookies. "We are keeping it simple this year," she muttered, avoiding eye contact. Dad entered, his stony expression silencing any further questions. The night of the Christmas gathering arrived. Every family was required to attend. The grand community hall buzzed with unease, the air thick with tension. "Why does everyone look so scared?" I whispered to a girl next to me. Her pale face darted nervously. "Do not ask," she hissed. "Just stay quiet." Mr. Grayson, the head of the community association, stepped onto the stage. His ever-present smile never reached his cold, grey eyes. "Welcome, friends," he began smoothly. "Tonight, we uphold our cherished tradition, the naughty and nice list." My stomach turned. I had dismissed the list as a silly holiday gimmick, but the atmosphere told a different story. Two women carried a massive black leather book to the podium. Grayson opened it with reverence. "Those on the nice list will be rewarded. Those on the naughty list," his smile widened unnaturally, "will face the consequences of their actions." Names were called, and children received either silver or red pins. When my name was announced, my heart sank. Michael Carter, naughty list. Mom sobbed quietly as two men in dark suits approached. "What is this?" I stammered, backing away. They grabbed my arms with unrelenting force. "Mom, Dad," I cried, panic setting in. "Help me." "It is for your own good," Dad said coldly. Drag into the woods. I found myself in a clearing lit by a roaring bonfire. Around it stood other children, their faces pale with terror. The adults formed a circle, chanting low, guttural tones. One by one, the children were pushed into the flames, their screams swallowed by the fire. When my turn came, I fought desperately, pleading for mercy. But their blank faces showed no compassion. Grayson leaned close, his smile unwavering. "It is nothing personal, Michael. just tradition. Darkness engulfed me. When I awoke, I was no longer myself. My body had transformed, roots stretched deep into the earth, branches reached skyward. I was a tree rooted in Willow Haven, surrounded by others like me. I could see everything, the town, the children, the cycle continuing. Mom sat beneath me daily, tears streaming, whispering apologies. Her grief echoed the sorrow of other parents who unknowingly contributed to this horror. The wrought iron gates of Willow Haven remained closed, locking in its dark secret. And I, like so many before me, could do nothing but grow, a silent witness to the cursed cycle.
Story 2. Santa's Silent Watch.
Christmas is my 5-year-old daughter's favorite time of the year. She loves the decorations, the presents, and especially visiting Santa at the mall. Like always, she sat on Santa's lap, shared her wish list, and promised she had been a good girl. Santa's booming ho, 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 and assurance of gifts lit up her face. At home, I had a tradition of adding presents under the tree nightly, telling her Santa made multiple trips because of his busy schedule. Each morning, she excitedly counted the new gifts. But this year, something odd started happening. Every night, as I added presents, I would hear my daughter sneaking out of bed, flashlight in hand, determined to catch Santa. On Christmas Eve, everything seemed normal. She went to bed early, and I added the final presents. Oddly, there were no footsteps or door creaks that night. The next morning, she excitedly declared, "I saw Santa. He came to my room and told me to stay in bed if I wanted more presents." I brushed it off as her imagination until later that morning. Among the gifts was one I did not recognize, beautifully wrapped, with a tag reading, "To the good little girl." Curious, I opened it. Inside were dozens of photos, pictures of us sleeping, leaving the house, and even my daughter at the mall on Santa's lap. At the bottom was a note. "Thank you for being such a good girl. I have been watching to make sure you were telling the truth. I hope you like the presents I left. Love, Santa." As my hand shook, my daughter hugged a teddy bear from the mysterious box. "It sings a song," she exclaimed, squeezing it. The bear's voice filled the room. "He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake."
Story 3. Cosmic Horror on Christmas Eve.
I had never experienced Christmas carolers in my neighborhood before. It always seemed like one of those traditions more alive in movies than reality. So when I heard singing outside my window on the winter solstice, I was both intrigued and uneasy. The singing began faintly, a distant melody growing louder and nearer. It was not a familiar Christmas carol, but something ancient and otherworldly. I looked out to see figures cloaked in oversized green and scarlet robes, their hoods completely obscuring their faces. My husband Martin joined me, trying to reassure me. "They're likely from St. Aria's Cathedral," he said. "Their chanting might just be some old liturgical tradition." But the guttural, unearthly sounds gave me a deep sense of foreboding. My phone inexplicably failed to record them, heightening my unease. An older neighbor, braver than most, stepped outside to confront the group. His angry words went unanswered as the carolers continued their chant. Then he froze, staring into the hood of one of the figures. Moments later, he collapsed, trembling and unresponsive. His wife rushed to his aid, dragging him back while avoiding the hooded figures entirely. "Martin, call the authorities," I pleaded. Despite his hesitation, he agreed. But as he moved, our young daughter, Gigi, awoke and entered the room, curious about the commotion. Before I could stop her, she darted outside after her father. I chased after them, and that is when I saw it. One of the figures turned, and within its hood was not a face, but a void, a cavernous space housing a floating, glowing wisp. Tentacles slithered beneath its robes. My knees buckled as dread overcame me. Then I noticed something far worse. Descending from the heavens was a massive, amorphous entity, the great galactic ghoul. Its gelatinous form was riddled with pulsating cavities lined with sharp teeth and rasping tongues. The wassailers, as I now thought of them, revealed spectral appendages and launched themselves skyward to confront the monstrous being. They attacked with otherworldly precision, striking at the creature's writhing tongues. The ghoul roared in agony before exploding into harmless, shimmering particles that fell like blue snow. One caroller returned to the ground. He surveyed the scene, then addressed me directly. That was a great galactic ghoul, a young one. They drift across dimensions, devouring worlds. We lured it here to stop it. I regret the fear this caused, but it was necessary. His calm tone contrasted with the nightmare I had just endured. Soon after, emergency vehicles and black SUVs swarmed the neighborhood. Agents administered care and gathered our accounts, offering medications to ease the trauma. Most of my neighbors and even Gigi now think it was a dream, but I remember. I remember the wassailers standing against an existential horror. It was a reminder that, even in the coldest, darkest nights, there is courage and sacrifice. And that, perhaps, is the true spirit of the season.
Story 4. Satanic Grimoire.
I found a cryptic phrase scrawled in an old tome, hidden in a secret passageway in my father's basement. Remove your skin, remove your sin, remove the life you sold to them. Reading those words confirmed all my suspicions. My father was involved in dark magic, and he'd unleashed something unspeakable on our quiet suburban community. Let me explain. 3 years ago, Pastor Noah Winters fell through the floorboards of his pulpit at St. Mary's Church during his Christmas sermon. Beneath the church, hidden from view, was what the media called a satanic dungeon. In it, they discovered evidence of a satanic cult that had operated in the area during the 1970s, including the oldest grimoire known to man. Pastor Winter's fall led to an investigation, and the book was sold at auction. My father worked at the auction house, and I always suspected he'd been involved with occult practices in the past. In the 1970s, he had lived on the West Coast, where rumors said he had run with dark circles and fled trouble. When he learned about the book's sale, something in his eyes changed. By the time the book was sold, my father lost his job when it was discovered that the grimoire had been replaced with a fake. I knew who had the real book. By this point, I was in college and only came home a few times a month. When I returned for Christmas, my sister Sami told me that strange men had been visiting our house. My mother, who had been absent for years, suddenly returned, sitting at the kitchen table like she'd never left. Sami was in shock, and when I went to confront my mother, I found the house empty, except for signs of her sudden return, a half-drunk beer and a cigarette still smouldering in the ashtray. I descended into the basement, where I found the secret passage I had discovered as a child. The old laundry room led to a tunnel beneath our backyard, one that led to an ancient stone door connected to St. Mary's Church. I had never been able to open it before, but now it was ajar. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I had entered the underground altar of the satanic cult. The renovation of the church hadn't touched this dark place. The altar stood before me, surrounded by eerie blue light glowing from the open grimoire. Its pages seemed to pulse with energy. I saw the remains of what looked like skin, sheds from something large, like giant snakes. And then I realized my parents were involved in something much darker than I had ever known, and whatever had been set into motion before my birth was now starting again.
Story 5. Suicide hotline call from the abandoned house.
Does anyone remember the strange obsession with a certain suicide hotline about 6 years ago? Well, unfortunately for me, it's something I'll never be able to forget. I didn't come forward at first because I desperately wanted to avoid attention. But as time passed, the longer I kept quiet, the more it seemed like opening an old wound just for the sake of attention. But now I feel an unknown price has been paid for my silence, and the sinister force that surrounded the place is now coming to collect. I don't know what else to do but leave an official record in case the strange feeling that has been slowing my heart rate proves itself true. A temp agency I consulted with offered me a position at the hotline. It seemed like a great opportunity, especially with the promise of helping people during their darkest moments. Save lives while earning a living for your family, they said. It sounded like a win-win. After all, I had made some mistakes in my past. Perhaps this would be a way to atone for them. My first month was uneventful. I ended up helping more grieving family members than actual callers in crisis. I'd heard of strange calls coming through, but that was expected, right? Pranksters love to make mischief, especially with something so serious. But it wasn't anything too alarming at first. Then, one Thursday night, everything changed. I was scheduled for the overnight shift from 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. After settling into my desk, the phone rang. Me. Thank you for calling the Brighter Futures Suicide Hotline. We're here today to help you make it through tomorrow. Can I have your name, please? Caller, silence. I waited, trying to stay calm. After a long pause, I spoke again. Me. Hello. I'm here to help. What seems to be the problem today? Still nothing. I thought about ending the call, but then remembered something from my training. Never hang up first. That was a fireable offense. I had to wait for the caller to end the call. Suddenly, a burst of static broke the silence, both startling and comforting me at the same time. A soft, almost inaudible voice began to speak. Caller, he's in here with me. That was not what I expected. I had trained for mental health crises, but this sounded different. This was a child. Me. Hello, sweetheart. Who is with you? Are you okay? Caller, he's in here with me. Me. Who is? Are you in danger? Let's talk about this together. Caller, shallow breathing. Me. Listen to me. Stay on the line with me. I'm not going anywhere, okay? I want to help. Say the word absolutely if you're in danger. Caller, sniffles. He's in here with me. Me. I know, sweetheart, but can you tell me who he is? Do you know him? Is he a stranger? Where are you right now? Caller, he's, and then silence. I was running out of things to say. I needed help, and fast. I gestured to a nearby co-worker, hoping for a quick response. We had protocols, but this felt different. More bursts of static filled the line as I frantically tried to keep the child talking. Me, it's okay if you can't say anything right now. Just know I'm here with you. I promised I wouldn't leave, and I won't. But you have to let me help. Then the line crackled again, but this time it formed words. Caller whispers. Absolutely. Then the call ended. Thankfully, we were able to trace the call's location, and the authorities were contacted immediately. But there was something about the situation that left everyone unsettled. As I shared the details with my team, the atmosphere shifted. Some were visibly angry, while others appeared horrified. The woman sitting beside me, Denise, suddenly bolted out of the room crying. I couldn't understand why she had such a strong reaction. Before I could gather myself, my desk phone rang again. It was the police. They had traced the call to an abandoned house, one that had been destroyed in a fire years ago. There were no children, no people, just an old, singed telephone hanging off the hook in the ruined house. The authorities noted deep scratch marks near the door, but they couldn't determine when they had been made. Half the team went home early that night. No one even asked if I wanted to leave. I was the one who had taken the call, after all. One of the remaining staff members, Jim, approached me. He seemed concerned and asked me to sit down. He told me something about Denise that sent chills down my spine. Denise had lost her son a year ago in a tragic fire. It had happened during Christmas when her ex-husband, upset over holiday visitation, set fire to their home after drugging her son to sleep. The boy never made it out. But the most chilling part, the abandoned house where the call had originated, was the same location where Denise's son had died. I never went back to the hotline, and I cut off contact with everyone I'd met there. But the real horror came years later. I've been getting phone calls on my personal cell phone, and each one is the same. The static, the whispers. Caller, he's in here with us.
Story 6. Ghost of Gerald Forrester.
The town of Silver Hollow was known for its peaceful winters, where snow blanketed the streets and the sound of carolers filled the crisp December air. Nestled between rolling hills and an evergreen forest, the town seemed like the perfect place to celebrate Christmas. But beneath its charming facade, Silver Hollow hid a dark secret, a shadow that returned every Christmas Eve. The story began decades ago with a man named Gerald Forrester, a recluse who lived in a cabin deep within the woods. Gerald had been a toy maker, crafting beautiful wooden figures that the townsfolk would eagerly buy for their children. But one Christmas, a tragic fire consumed his home, taking his life and his creations. Rumors began to swirl that Gerald's spirit lingered, seeking revenge for the loss of his craft and the indifference of the townsfolk. Every year after Gerald's death, strange events occurred on Christmas Eve. Families reported hearing faint tapping on their windows, even on the upper floors of their homes. Others claimed to see a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the forest, watching the town in silence. The stories were dismissed as folklore, a tale to keep children entertained or fearful enough to behave. But one Christmas Eve, the McAllister family experienced the legend firsthand. Having recently moved to Silver Hollow, they were unaware of the town's dark history. Their cozy home sat near the forest's edge, with a large fireplace they had eagerly decorated with stockings and garlands. As the snow fell heavily that evening, the McAllisters gathered around the fire. The warmth of the flames and the glow of the Christmas tree filled the room with comfort. Their young daughter Lily was particularly excited, hanging a plate of cookies for Santa on the mantel. At precisely midnight, the tapping began. It was faint at first, almost rhythmic, as if someone were lightly rapping on the windows. Mr. McAllister, thinking it might be a branch swaying in the wind, went to investigate. But when he looked outside, he saw only his own reflection in the frosted glass. The tapping grew louder, and the family began to feel uneasy. Lily clung to her mother, her small hand trembling. "It's just the wind," Mrs. McAllister assured her, though her voice wavered. Suddenly the fireplace roared, the flames shooting up as if stoked by an unseen hand. The garlands hanging above the mantel fell, igniting briefly before extinguishing. The room plunged into an unnatural cold, and the tapping ceased, replaced by a faint whispering. The voices seemed to echo from the walls themselves, growing louder until they formed words. "Leave the forest. Undisturbed." Mr. McAllister grabbed a flashlight and opened the front door, determined to put an end to the unsettling noises. Snowflakes swirled in the air, and the forest loomed ominously in the distance. He saw nothing at first, but then his beam of light caught movement among the trees. A tall shadow shifted, disappearing deeper into the woods. Despite his wife's protests, he ventured out. The crunch of snow under his boots, the only sound accompanying him. The forest seemed alive, the trees creaking and groaning, as if whispering secrets. The deeper he went, the darker it became, until the beam of his flashlight barely illuminated the path ahead. Meanwhile, back in the house, the whispers grew louder. Mrs. McAllister tried to comfort Lily, but her own fear was evident. The Christmas lights on the tree flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. One shadow, larger than the others, began to move independently, stretching toward the fireplace. Lily pointed at it, her voice barely a whisper. "It's him," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mrs. McAllister pulled her closer, unsure of what to do. The shadow grew, taking on a humanoid form with elongated limbs and hollow eyes. It stood still, watching them, before raising a hand to point toward the forest. At that moment, Mr. McAllister stumbled back into the house, pale and shaking. "We need to leave," he said, his voice trembling. "Now." The family hurried to their car, the shadow's gaze following them as they drove away. As they passed the edge of the forest, the shadow dissolved into the trees, leaving only an eerie silence behind. The McAllisters never returned to Silver Hollow, and their story became another chapter in the town's dark legend. Locals avoided the forest entirely, especially on Christmas Eve, when the shadow of Gerald Forrester was said to walk among the trees, watching, waiting, and ensuring that no one disturbed his eternal rest. Over the years, the town's population dwindled, and Silver Hollow became little more than a ghost town. But travelers passing through on snowy December nights sometimes report hearing faint tapping on their car windows, or seeing a shadowy figure standing just beyond the tree line. reminding them that some spirits never truly rest.
Story 7. The Voice on the Line.
The booth carried the stale scent of coffee and cigarettes, clinging to the aging equipment as much as it did to Sam's sweater. The turntable, reel-to-reel tape machine and rotary phone hummed softly under the dim light of a single desk lamp. Outside, snow piled high against the station's windows, muffling the howling wind that rocked the small building. Inside, the faint tick of the wall clock and the soft crackle of static through Sam's headphones were the only sounds. It was Christmas Eve, 1971. As the clock crept past 10 p.m., the outside world seemed distant. Sam had been a radio DJ in Crown Point, Indiana, for a decade. His deep, soothing voice was a familiar companion to listeners. Before his time at the mic, Sam had served as a radio operator during the Vietnam War, an experience that had left its mark despite his lack of combat duty. Taking a deep breath, Sam leaned into the microphone. Good evening, night owls, and Merry Christmas Eve. This is Sam on the late shift, keeping you company as we count down to midnight. Let's start with a classic Bing Crosby's White Christmas. The song played as Sam lit another cigarette. The warmth of connecting with his listeners offered solace. But the night took a chilling turn with a call from a man named Jack. Jack's voice was smooth and calm, almost hypnotic. He shared a tale of meeting a woman in 1963, but the story turned horrifying. I pretended my car had trouble, asked her to help. Then I ended her life. Sam yanked the call off the air, shaken. Sorry for that interruption, he said, forcing composure as he played another song. But Jack called again. You hung up on me, Sam. Let me back on or someone gets hurt. A muffled scream crackled through the line. Sam's heart sank. What do you want? To tell my story, Jack replied, unbothered. Sam had no choice but to let him back on air. Jack described his crimes, his chilling tone filled with a strange nostalgia. He spoke of luring and pursuing his victims, finding beauty in their fear. Sam listened, horrified, hoping Jack would slip up and reveal something useful. Then Jack said, let's talk about Joanne. The mention of Sam's ex-wife froze him. What did you just say? Joanne is here. She says hello. A faint cry for help came through the line. Sam's voice shook. If you hurt her. Stay calm, Sam, Jack interrupted. She is fine for now. Keep me on air, and she stays that way. Cut me off, and you will regret it. Sam's mind raced. He felt trapped, a helpless witness to Jack's horrifying game. Fine, Sam said, his voice trembling. You are still on. Good choice, Jack replied, his tone almost cheerful. Let us make this a Christmas to remember.
Story 8. The Laughing Child.
I have been hesitant to share this because it sounds like I am losing my mind, but I believe there is a child ghost in this house. Since we moved in, I have seen this boy at least 4 times. He looks around 8 or 9 years old, wearing a 1970s style striped t-shirt and a bowl haircut. He is always laughing, as if he is playing tag and running away from someone. The first time I saw him upstairs, running across the hallway before vanishing into thin air. After that, he appeared in my bedroom, running into the master bathroom, and later in the downstairs living room and my office. None of us have seen him simultaneously, but my wife and one of my sons have described witnessing similar events. The most unsettling encounter happened a few days ago. We were sitting at the kitchen table when I thought I saw one of my sons standing across the room. But I did not look up because it was just a fleeting glance from the corner of my eye. Suddenly, the cabinet doors flung open and several glasses crashed to the floor. When I called out, I learned that my son had been upstairs the entire time. Later that same day, after we cleaned up the mess, an ornament fell from our Christmas tree and shattered. I dismissed it as a coincidence, but then, mere minutes later, the entire tree toppled over not slowly, but as if someone had shoved it with force. I had been sitting on the couch right in front of the tree and felt a distinct presence in the room, as though someone else was there with me. Yet, no one else was home. The more I think about these events, the more unsettled I feel. I cannot explain what is happening, but I know it is not my imagination.
Story 9. The Cursed Doll.
9 a.m., Christmas morning. That is unusually late for Christmas morning. Had the kids not woken up yet? I lazily pulled myself out of bed until the piercing scream of my wife jolted my senses into overdrive. I bolted across the hallway like a man possessed. Amanda was trembling, pale as a ghost, standing at the door of Alfie's room. She was sobbing incoherently, hysterically pointing inside, urging me to look. When I peered in, the room seemed normal, except for the horrible stench of burnt wood. Everything appeared fine until my gaze fell on Alfie's bed. A still steaming lump of coal, grotesquely shaped like my son, lay in his place. A visible, scream-like gash was permanently etched across its surface. I had no time to process the horrifying sight before Millie's voice called out to me. Her faint, quivering words barely broke through Amanda's anguished cries. Struggling to hold it together, I turned toward my daughter. Her wide, bloodshot eyes sent chills through my body. My little girl clutched a grotesque, fleshy Frankenstein of a rag doll in her small hands. The doll looked more like a prop from a horror film than a child's toy. I swallowed hard as she slowly approached, dragging the foul, putrid plaything across the floor. "Hey, sweetheart," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "Where did you get that doll, darling?" Millie's tear-filled eyes met mine. "The Yule goat gave it to me. Papa," she choked out, her voice breaking. "It came through Alfie's window and did this to him too." She pointed at the open window in Alfie's room, but I was sure that Amanda had closed that window before putting Alfie to bed last night. I saw her do it with my own eyes.
Story 10. The Dark Side of Santa.
Christmas Eve was meant to be warm and magical. A night when snow softly falls, lights twinkle in every window, and the world seems to hold its breath, waiting for morning. But that Christmas Eve I learned better. When the snow fell, it wasn't magical. It smothered, muffling the screams. The lights didn't twinkle. They cast shadows that danced, mocking us. And the world wasn't holding its breath. It was holding something back. Something old. Something hungry. We were a picture-perfect suburban family, at least on the outside. Dad with his tie askew, Mom humming Christmas carols while baking cookies, and my little sister Lily barely able to sit still with excitement. She was 6, still a firm believer in Santa Claus. I was 13, too old to believe but young enough to let her have her magic. The neighborhood looked the same. Houses lined with blinking lights, inflatable snowmen wobbling in the yards. You could almost forget about Jimmy Peterson down the street, the boy who had gone missing a week ago. The police said it was a custody dispute or a runaway. My parents believed that. I didn't. Even before the sun set, I felt it. Something wasn't right. It wasn't something I could see or hear, just a weight, like the air itself was leaning in too close. The streets were too quiet, the windows too dark behind their cheerful lights. "Quit being so serious," Dad said while we hung the stockings. "You're going to scare Lily with that storm cloud face." "I'm not scared," I shot back, lying. After dinner, we put Lily to bed. She carefully placed cookies and milk for Santa and wrote a note. "Dear Santa, I've been so good. Please don't forget me." My parents went to bed early, leaving me by the tree, staring at the lights. The house felt too big, too quiet. The silence crawled into my ears, amplifying every creak of the floorboards and rustle of wind outside. Then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the wind or the tree settling. It was a faint jingle like bells, slow, heavy, deliberate, like someone dragging them along. I pressed my nose to the cold glass. The snow-covered street was empty. No cars, no movement, just that eerie sound getting closer. Before I could convince myself it was nothing, I saw the first shadow move. It flickered across the roof of the Thompsons' house, long and hunched. Then another. They didn't look like reindeer. Too tall, too spindly. And they didn't look like Santa either. Then he appeared. He crawled across the rooftops, dragging something heavy behind him. His silhouette was familiar, like Santa, but wrong. His legs were too long, his shoulders too broad. His head jerked unnaturally. I backed away from the window, heart racing. I thought about waking my parents, but the noise stopped me. A scratching, scrabbling sound on our roof. I froze as the sound moved toward the chimney. My breath caught when I heard the faintest thud, something landing in the living room behind me. I turned slowly. The Christmas tree lights flickered, casting just enough glow to reveal the figure standing by the fireplace. He was enormous, hunched so his shoulders brushed the top of the mantel. His red suit was filthy, torn and hanging in strips. The beard was yellowed, matted with dirt, or something worse. His hat sat crooked, stained. And his face. Oh, his face. His eyes were sunken, gleaming like animal eyes in the dim light. His mouth stretched too far, filled with crooked, sharp teeth that gleamed in the Christmas lights. He smiled, wide and knowing, and I swear I heard a low, wet chuckle. The sack slung over his shoulder writhed. Whatever was inside wasn't presence. It was moving, squirming. He dropped it with a thud, and a muffled cry came from within. I snapped out of my paralysis and bolted upstairs, almost tripping in my panic. I flung open Lily's door. She was already sitting up, rubbing her eyes. "What's wrong?" she whispered. "Shh," I hissed, dragging her out of bed. "We have to hide." I pushed her into the closet and climbed in after her, closing the door just as the floorboards creaked outside her room. I pressed my hand over her mouth to keep her quiet, my own hand trembling so hard I thought it might give us away. The door creaked open, and through the slats of the closet, I saw him. He stood in the doorway, head cocked like he was listening. He sniffed the air, low and loud, then let out a guttural growl. Lily whimpered, and I squeezed her tighter. He took a step closer, his boots thudding against the hardwood. Then another. I thought he'd found us, but at the last second, he turned toward the window. He climbed through it, disappearing into the night. We stayed in that closet until dawn. When we finally emerged, the house was eerily still. The cookies and milk were gone. So was Lily's note. Outside, I saw boot prints leading away from the house, joined by a smaller set like a child's. Down the street, the Thompsons were shouting for Mark. Another missing child, another family left to wonder. I never told anyone what happened that night. They wouldn't have believed me. But every Christmas Eve, when the snow falls and the streets go quiet, I stay awake, listening. Because somewhere out there he's still coming. And the next time, he might not leave me behind.
Thanks for joining us on this terrifying adventure. If tonight's story gave you chills, let us know in the comments below and share your own scary experiences too. Don't forget to leave a like if you want more nightmares and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, sleep tight and remember, not all shadows are empty.